My father left me a ruined property out in the country and gave my golden child brother a luxury penthouse in New York. 2 years later, my mother stood in my grand marble lobby and told me I had exactly 48 hours to pack my bags and sign the deed over to my brother. When my brother finally pulled up in his truck, expecting to see a rotting barn, his face went completely pale at the gold plaque by the gates. He had no idea I had spent the last 2 years building a fortune. Before I tell you how my family tried to steal my empire and how I made them lose everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against a toxic family who wanted to see you fail. My name is Sydney and I am 30 years old. In my family of highly successful corporate lawyers and doctors, I was always considered the black sheep. My mother, Yvonne, cared about exactly two things in this world: maintaining her status at the most exclusive black elite country clubs in Atlanta and spoiling my older brother, Andre. Andre was 33 and a failed tech investor who burned through money faster than he could make it, but my mother treated him like royalty. When my father, Elias, passed away, he left a very specific will. He was a self-made billionaire who built his fortune from the ground up. He saw right through my mother and brother, but he kept his peace to maintain family harmony. In his will, he left Andre a $15 million penthouse in New York. To me, he left a massive piece of abandoned farmland in the Hudson Valley with a crumbling mansion that had not been inhabited for decades. My mother laughed in my face at the reading of the will, telling me I finally got the pile of dirt I deserved for refusing to go to law school. What they did not understand was that I had spent the last 8 years working relentlessly as a hospitality developer. I did not see a pile of dirt. I saw a canvas. I spent every waking moment and every dime I had transforming that ruined estate into the most exclusive high-end resort and spa in the state. I named it the Elias in honor of my father. I kept my project completely hidden from my family. We rarely spoke anyway. But 2 years after my father died, my mother and brother suddenly showed up at my property. I was standing in the newly finished grand lobby reviewing the guest list for our opening gala, when the heavy oak doors swung open. My mother, Yvonne, marched in wearing a designer coat and tapping her heels aggressively against the imported Italian marble floor. "You have exactly 48 hours to pack your bags and transfer this deed back to the family." She snapped, her voice echoing across the vaulted ceiling. "Your brother just lost his New York apartment. He will be taking over this property today as his private summer estate, so I suggest you start moving your junk." I simply stood there holding my clipboard. Before I could even respond, my sister-in-law Victoria walked through the doors. Victoria is white, and she married Andre 5 years ago. She was a classic gold digger who constantly used subtle microaggressions against me while pretending to be part of our black family culture. She walked in holding a scented tissue over her nose, looking around with exaggerated disgust. "Ugh, I thought Elias left you a rotting barn," she sneered. "Did you take out a payday loan just to paint these walls? Andre is bringing his designer furniture soon. Take your little hospitality certificates and go sleep in the shed like you used to do during the holidays." Her comment brought back a flood of memories. Whenever Victoria and Andre visited the house of my parents for Christmas, my mother would force me to sleep on an air mattress in the unheated storage room so Victoria could have my bedroom. They always treated me like the hired help. I did not argue. I just smiled and gestured toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows facing the main driveway. "You might want to step outside and see what your husband is looking at," I said calmly. Andre had just pulled up in his expensive pickup truck. He slammed the door shut, but he was not moving toward the building. He was frozen, staring at the massive solid gold plaque mounted on the front gates. The sign read, "The Elias Elite Resort and Spa Members. Only $150,000 annually." This was not a ruined farm. It was a masterpiece of luxury real estate, and I owned every single inch of it. I watched the blood drain from the face of Andre. The blinding jealousy that twisted his features was almost beautiful to witness. He had lost his multi-million-dollar penthouse and realized his sister, the family scapegoat, had built a golden empire. He stormed into the lobby, his fists clenched. Victoria looked at his furious face and then looked back at me. A wicked smirk crossed her lips. She pulled out her phone and immediately dialed 911. "Yes, hello, I need police immediately," Victoria cried into the phone, forcing tears into her voice. "There is an aggressive black woman trespassing on the private estate of my husband and she is refusing to leave. She is threatening us." My mother Yvonne immediately joined the performance, yelling loudly so the emergency operator could hear. "She is delusional. She stole the land of her brother. Send officers now before she hurts someone." I stood completely still, watching them orchestrate this dangerous lie. 10 minutes later, local police sirens wailed up the private driveway. 3 officers stormed into the lobby, hands resting on their belts. Victoria rushed over to them, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Officer, thank God you are here," she sobbed. "She broke into our property and refuses to leave." The lead officer stepped forward. I smiled and gave him a polite wave. "Good afternoon, Chief Davis," I said. Chief Davis relaxed his posture and extended his hand to shake mine. "Good afternoon, Sydney," he replied. Chief Davis was the head of the private security firm I had contracted to protect the resort. The local police department worked closely with my security team because my resort brought massive tax revenue to their town. I opened my briefcase and handed Chief Davis the official property deed and the limited liability company documentation. "As you can see, Chief, I am the sole owner and operator of this property," I explained clearly. "These 3 individuals are trespassing and attempting to file a false police report." Chief Davis turned to Victoria with a stern glare. "Filing a false police report is a serious crime. I suggest you and your family vacate this premises immediately before I place you under arrest for trespassing and misuse of emergency services." Victoria dropped her fake tears instantly, her face turning bright red. My mother lost whatever composure she had left. "You stubborn, ungrateful brat!" Yvonne screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "When your father divided his assets, I told him to leave you with absolutely nothing. You do not deserve a single dime compared to Andre. You are a failure, and you will always be a failure." Seeing that physical intimidation and police involvement had failed, Andre stepped forward. He reached into his designer jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper with a notary stamp on it. "You think a piece of paper from the county matters?" he snarled, stepping dangerously close to me. "This is the updated will addendum of our father. He signed it exactly 2 days before he died. It completely revokes your ownership of this land and transfers everything back to the primary estate which I control." He shoved the paper into my hands. It looked incredibly official, complete with the signature of my father and a legal seal. "You have 24 hours to call a lawyer before I bulldoze you out of here," Andre whispered. His eyes filled with pure malice. "Enjoy your last night in a real bed, Sydney, because tomorrow you are out on the street." I looked down at the document. My heart beat a steady, calm rhythm in my chest. They really thought a forged piece of paper would be enough to tear down the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. They had no idea I was holding evidence that would not only destroy their fake will, but send them all straight to prison. The exact word count of this content is 1,379 words. My father left me a piece of ruined farmland and gave my brother a luxury penthouse in New York. 2 years later, my mother stood in my grand marble lobby and told me I had exactly 48 hours to pack my bags and sign the deed over to my brother. When my brother finally pulled up expecting to see a rotting barn, his face went completely pale. He had no idea I had spent the last 2 years building a fortune. Before I tell you how my family tried to steal my empire and how I made them lose everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against a toxic family who wanted to see you fail. My name is Sydney, and I am 30 years old. In my family of highly successful corporate lawyers and doctors, I was always considered the black sheep. My mother Yvonne cared about exactly 2 things in this world: maintaining her status at the most exclusive black elite country clubs in Atlanta, and spoiling my older brother Andre. Andre was 33 and a failed tech investor who burned through money faster than he could make it, but my mother treated him like absolute royalty. When my father Elias passed away, he left a very specific will. He was a self-made billionaire who built his fortune from the ground up. He saw right through my mother and brother, but he kept his peace to maintain family harmony. In his will, he left Andre a $15 million penthouse in New York. To me, he left a massive piece of abandoned farmland in the Hudson Valley, with a crumbling mansion that had not been inhabited for decades. My mother laughed in my face at the reading of the will, telling me I finally got the pile of dirt I deserved for refusing to go to law school. What they did not understand was that I had spent the last 8 years working relentlessly as a hospitality developer. I did not see a pile of dirt. I saw a blank canvas. I spent every waking moment and every dime I had transforming that ruined estate into the most exclusive high-end resort and spa in the state. I named it the Elias in honor of my father. I kept my project completely hidden from my family. We rarely spoke anyway. But 2 years after my father died, my mother and sister-in-law suddenly showed up at my property. I was standing in the newly finished grand lobby reviewing the guest list for our opening gala, when the heavy oak doors swung open violently. My mother Yvonne marched in wearing a designer coat and tapping her heels aggressively against the imported Italian marble floor. She did not even look at the crystal chandeliers above us or the custom artwork on the walls. Her eyes were fixed on me with that familiar cold disdain. "You have exactly 48 hours to pack your bags and transfer this deed back to the family," she snapped, her voice echoing across the vaulted ceiling. "Your brother just lost his New York apartment. He will be taking over this property today as his private summer estate, so I suggest you start moving your junk right now." I simply stood there holding my clipboard, feeling a mix of amusement and pure anger. Before I could even respond, my sister-in-law Victoria walked through the doors. Victoria is white and she married Andre 5 years ago. She was a classic gold digger who constantly used subtle microaggressions against me while pretending to be part of our Black family culture. She walked in holding a scented tissue over her nose, looking around with exaggerated disgust. "I thought Elias left you a rotting barn," she sneered, looking me up and down. "Did you take out a payday loan just to paint these walls? Andre is bringing his designer furniture soon. Take your little hospitality certificates and go sleep in the shed like you used to do during the holidays." Her comment brought back a flood of painful memories. Whenever Victoria and Andre visited the house of my parents for Christmas, my mother would force me to sleep on an air mattress in the unheated storage room so Victoria could have my bedroom. They always treated me like the hired help in my own home. Victoria loved putting me in my place, and my mother enabled every single second of it because Victoria came from a wealthy white family that my mother desperately wanted to impress. I did not argue. I just smiled and gestured toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows facing the main driveway. My silence only made my mother more furious. She stepped closer to me, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Do not stand there smiling at me." "Sydney," my mother hissed. "I am your mother, and I am giving you an order. Andre needs a place to stay to clear his head after his business setback. You are single, and you have no real responsibilities. You can easily rent a small apartment in the city. This land belongs to the family, and Andre is the rightful head of the family now that your father is gone. We are taking it back." The sheer audacity of her demand was breathtaking. She wanted me to hand over the empire I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears just to cushion the fall of my arrogant brother. Andre had always been handed everything on a silver platter. My parents paid for his expensive education, his luxury cars, and his failed business ventures. Meanwhile, I had to take out student loans and work 3 jobs to pay for my own education, because they refused to support a career in hospitality. They told me it was essentially just glorified housekeeping. Now they wanted to steal my hard work to save Andre from his own financial incompetence. The level of entitlement was staggering, but unfortunately, it was exactly what I expected from them. I looked at Victoria, who was rolling her eyes, clearly eager to claim her new summer home. I took a deep breath and silently prepared to watch their entire perfect world crumble to the ground today. Victoria decided to escalate the situation immediately. She reached into her expensive designer handbag and pulled out her phone. Without a single ounce of hesitation, she dialed 911. I watched in absolute fascination as she flawlessly slipped into her role. Her voice trembled perfectly as she spoke to the emergency dispatcher. She cried into the receiver, claiming that a highly aggressive and dangerous black woman had broken into the private summer estate of her husband. She lied effortlessly, stating that I was refusing to leave the premises and that I was physically threatening the safety of her family. She begged the police to hurry. My mother, Yvonne, did not reprimand her daughter-in-law for this dangerous and racially charged lie. Instead, my mother fully supported the performance. Yvonne began shouting at the top of her lungs, ensuring her voice carried clearly through the phone line. She yelled that I was completely delusional and that I was attempting to steal the rightful inheritance of my brother. They were orchestrating a malicious trap, hoping the police would arrive and arrest me without asking any questions. They wanted me removed in handcuffs so they could claim the property by default. I stood my ground and observed their pathetic theatrical display. I did not raise my voice or attempt to argue my case. I knew that reacting with anger would only validate the false narrative Victoria was feeding to the dispatcher. My silence infuriated them even more. Andre paced back and forth across the lobby, running his hands over his head and muttering about how the land belonged to him. He insisted that our father would have never wanted me to own a hospitality empire. 10 minutes later, the piercing sound of local police sirens echoed up the long, winding private driveway of my resort. Red and blue lights flashed through the massive front windows. 3 officers stormed through the front entrance with their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Victoria immediately sprinted toward them with fresh tears streaming down her face. She pointed a manicured finger directly at me, playing the terrified victim to absolute perfection. She sobbed and thanked the officers for arriving so quickly, claiming she feared for her life. The lead officer stepped forward, taking in the scene. He looked at the frantic white woman, pointing at the calm black woman holding a clipboard. I offered the lead officer a warm and polite wave. "Good afternoon, Chief Davis," I said in a clear and welcoming tone. Chief Davis immediately relaxed his defensive posture, and a broad smile broke across his face. He walked past a bewildered Victoria and extended his hand to shake mine. "Good afternoon, Sydney," he replied with genuine respect. What my treacherous family did not know was that Chief Davis was not just a local police officer. He was also the head of the elite private security firm I had contracted to protect the entire resort property. The local police department worked very closely with my security team because my luxury establishment brought massive tax revenue and jobs to their town. We had a highly cooperative and mutually beneficial professional relationship. Victoria dropped her fake tears instantly, and her face turned a bright, angry shade of red. My mother lost whatever regal composure she had left. They both stared in utter shock as I casually opened my leather briefcase. I pulled out the official property deed and the limited liability company documentation that proved my absolute ownership. I handed the thick stack of legal papers directly to Chief Davis so he could review them. "As you can see, Chief Davis, I am the sole legal owner and operator of this entire estate," I explained while gesturing to the documents. "These 3 individuals are trespassing on my private commercial property, and they are actively attempting to file a false police report against me." Chief Davis reviewed the official state seals on my paperwork and handed the documents back to me with a nod. He turned around to face Victoria, and his friendly demeanor vanished completely. He glared at her with intense professional authority. "Filing a false police report is a very serious crime," he warned her sharply. "I strongly suggest you and your family vacate these premises immediately before I place you under arrest for criminal trespassing and the malicious misuse of emergency dispatch services." Victoria stood frozen in terror, completely humiliated and stripped of her unearned power. My brother and my mother realized their ambush had failed spectacularly. The trap they set for me had snapped shut on their own fingers. They always believed they could push me around without facing any real consequences. For years, they relied on my silence to maintain their twisted family hierarchy. Now they were finally learning that I was no longer the helpless young girl they used to torment. I was the architect of my own incredibly successful destiny, and they were merely uninvited guests standing in my magnificent lobby. They had absolutely zero power over my life anymore. The silence that fell over the grand lobby was absolutely deafening. Victoria stood completely frozen, her face drained of all color as she processed the reality that she was moments away from being escorted out in handcuffs. Chief Davis kept his hand resting casually near his radio, waiting for them to make a move. I watched my mother Yvonne realize that her perfectly orchestrated ambush had failed. For her entire life, she had relied on her social status and intimidation to control every situation. She was used to snapping her fingers and watching people scramble to obey her commands. But right now, she was utterly powerless, and the realization shattered her carefully crafted elite persona. The sophisticated matriarch vanished, and sheer, unadulterated rage took over. Cornered by the police presence and humiliated in front of her golden child, my mother completely lost her temper. Her face contorted with a vicious anger that I had not seen since I was a teenager. She lunged forward, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Chief Davis immediately stepped between us, blocking her path, but that did not stop her from unleashing decades of venom. "You stubborn, ungrateful brat!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing through the massive resort entrance. "You think you are so smart standing there with your little security team? You think this land belongs to you just because you managed to trick some contractors into building this ridiculous hotel? When your father divided his assets, I told him exactly what to do. I explicitly told Elias to leave you with absolutely nothing. I begged him to cut you out of the estate completely. You do not deserve a single dime compared to Andre. You are nothing but a disappointment to this family." Hearing my own mother admit that she had actively tried to disinherit me should have been a devastating blow. Any normal daughter would have crumbled under the weight of that hatred. But I just stood there looking at her flushed face, feeling absolutely nothing but pity. Her words confirmed everything I already knew about her character. She had always viewed my existence as an inconvenience and my success as a direct threat to her favorite son. I did not flinch, and I did not argue back. My calm demeanor only infuriated her further. She continued to hurl insults demanding that I surrender the property immediately, claiming that black families needed to protect their male heirs above all else. It was a pathetic display of manipulation wrapped in traditional family guilt, but I was completely immune to it. Seeing that physical intimidation and maternal guilt trips had completely failed to break me, Andre decided it was time to play his final card. He pushed past his terrified wife and stepped dangerously close to the police chief. His arrogant smirk had returned, replaced by a desperate, manic energy. He reached into the inner pocket of his custom-tailored designer jacket and pulled out a thick, folded document. The expensive paper crinkled loudly in the quiet room. "You think a county property deed actually matters?" He snarled, his eyes wide with malicious intent. "You think you can just steal the legacy of our father and keep it for yourself? This is the updated will addendum of Dad. He signed it exactly 2 days before he died." Andre aggressively shoved the document toward my chest. I did not reach out to take it, allowing it to fall to the marble floor between us. The heavy paper landed with a soft thud, revealing a raised notary stamp and a signature that looked exactly like the handwriting of my father. Andre glared at me, breathing heavily as he pointed down at the floor. "That addendum completely revokes your ownership of this land," he continued, his voice shaking with venom. "It transfers every single asset, including this entire acreage, back to the primary estate which I control. You built all of this on my land, Sydney. You financed this resort on property that legally belongs to me. You spent years constructing a luxury empire, and now I am taking it all back." He leaned forward, ignoring the warning glare from Chief Davis, who was now actively preparing to intervene. "You have exactly 24 hours to call whatever cheap lawyer you can afford before I bring a demolition crew here and bulldoze you out of my resort." Andre whispered, his tone laced with absolute malice. "I am going to tear down this entire lobby just because I can. Enjoy your last night sleeping in a real bed, Sydney, because tomorrow you are out on the street exactly where you belong." I looked down at the document resting on the polished floor. My heart beat a steady, calm rhythm in my chest. They really thought a forged piece of paper would be enough to tear down the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. They believed their little legal trick would force me to surrender. What my arrogant brother did not know was that I had already seen that exact document before. I knew exactly when it was created, and more importantly, I knew exactly how it was signed. I was holding evidence that would not only destroy their fake will, but send them all straight to federal prison for fraud. But I was not going to reveal my secret weapon today. I needed them to feel confident. I needed them to believe they had won so they would publicly commit to their lie. Chief Davis had seen enough. He instructed his officers to escort my family off the premises immediately. Andre smirked, believing he had delivered the ultimate death blow to my business. He grabbed the arm of Victoria and turned around, strutting out the double mahogany doors with my mother close behind. They drove away in his expensive pickup truck, leaving the forged document lying on my floor. I calmly bent down and picked up the paper, carefully sliding it into an evidence folder I kept at the reception desk. The war had officially begun, but I was not worried. Tomorrow night was the grand opening gala for my resort, and I knew exactly how I was going to use their greed to orchestrate their complete and total downfall. They had awakened a silent storm they could never possibly survive. The next evening, the crisp autumn air was filled with live jazz and the clinking of crystal glasses. I stood looking down at the magnificent ballroom of the Elias. Tonight was the official opening gala, and I had curated the guest list to feature the Black Excellence Investors Network. These were the most powerful African-American venture capitalists and real estate tycoons in the country. Waiters floated through the crowd carrying silver trays loaded with caviar and vintage champagne. I had spent 8 years working toward this exact moment, and despite the ugly confrontation with my family, I felt a profound sense of pride. I watched my guests marvel at the luxurious atmosphere I had meticulously created from the ruins my father left behind. Chief Davis had personally guaranteed my family would not be allowed near the private event spaces. But I knew my mother better than anyone. Yvonne possessed an uncanny ability to talk her way into any room where money and status were present. I had instructed the front gate to deny them entry, but I knew they could simply walk up the private beach path from the public road. Just as the clock struck 8, I spotted them. The heavy oak doors opened, and my mother strode in like she owned the building. She wore an ostentatious, gold-sequined gown. Victoria walked beside her, draped in a white silk dress that looked entirely too much like a bridal gown. Andre trailed behind them, wearing a velvet tuxedo jacket, looking nervous, but trying to project the false confidence of a successful tech entrepreneur. They had brazenly crashed my private gala. I did not signal my security team to remove them. Throwing them out would cause a massive public scene and disrupt the elegant atmosphere. Besides, I wanted to see exactly what kind of desperate game they were trying to play. My mother wasted no time. She immediately zeroed in on Marcus Vance, a billionaire venture capitalist who was the keynote speaker for the evening, and one of my most important partners. I watched from behind a floral arrangement as Yvonne smoothly intercepted him. She flashed her brightest smile and extended her hand, introducing herself and her son loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. She boasted about the legacy of my father Elias, banking on the fact that many of these older investors respected his name. I stepped slightly closer so I could hear her exact words. "It is such a pleasure to meet you, Marcus," she purred, her voice dripping with fake sophistication. "My son Andre is expanding the legacy of his father into the tech sector. He is developing a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform, and we are currently looking for elite partners. You simply must hear about his vision." Andre puffed out his chest and offered a firm handshake, launching into a heavily rehearsed pitch about his fake startup. I knew for a fact that Andre had zero product, zero team, and zero actual business plan. He was just stringing together trendy tech buzzwords, hoping to secure a blind investment to pay off his hidden debts. Victoria stood nearby, smiling tightly and nodding as if she understood a single word. Marcus Vance listened politely, but his sharp eyes scanned the room, clearly looking for the actual host of the event. Just as he spotted me approaching, my mother noticed where his attention had shifted. Without missing a single beat, Yvonne reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me forward into their circle. Her grip was tight, but her smile remained plastered on her face. "Ah, Marcus, look who is here." My mother announced, her tone dripping with intense, patronizing sweetness. "This is my daughter, Sydney. She is the event planner for tonight. We hired her to handle all the little decorations and the catering arrangements." "Did you not do a wonderful job with the flowers, Sydney? You really have a knack for making things look pretty." The sheer audacity of her lie was staggering. In front of the most powerful investors in the state, my own mother was deliberately stripping away my ownership and my identity. She was publicly reducing me to a hired helper in my own resort just to elevate the fragile ego of her golden child. She wanted them to believe that Andre was the wealthy heir hosting this magnificent gala, while I was merely the staff paid to arrange the napkins. Victoria smirked openly, taking a sip of her champagne. "Yes, the catering is adequate," Victoria chimed in. "Though I must say the appetizers are a bit cold. You should probably run back to the kitchen and check on the staff, Sydney. We would not want Andre to look bad in front of his important guests." Marcus frowned, looking back and forth between us. He had received a formal invitation with my name listed as the founder and primary developer of the Elias. He was a smart man, and I could see the confusion forming in his mind. He opened his mouth to question my mother, but I gently raised my hand to stop him. I looked at Yvonne and Victoria, refusing to let their pathetic attempts at humiliation break my composure. I did not raise my voice or correct their malicious lies. I knew that reacting with anger would only validate the false narrative they were trying to weave. I simply offered them a chilling smile. "I am so glad you are enjoying the decor, Mother," I said, my voice completely steady and serene. "You are absolutely right. The catering is the most crucial part of any successful event. In fact, I was just about to head to the kitchen to check on the staff. Please excuse me, Marcus. I hope you enjoy the presentation tonight." I turned away from their circle, leaving Marcus to deal with the desperate begging of my brother. My mother looked incredibly smug, believing she had successfully put me in my place and secured the spotlight for Andre. Victoria laughed softly, clearly thrilled by my supposed retreat. They both thought I was running away to hide because I was too weak to defend my own territory. They had no idea that I was not retreating at all. I was moving the pieces on the board to execute the next phase of their destruction. I pushed through the heavy silver swinging doors and stepped into the massive commercial kitchen of my resort. Normally, a kitchen of this magnitude right before $1,000 a plate dinner service would be a chaotic symphony of sizzling pans and shouting cooks. Instead, the vast room was chillingly quiet. The savory smell of roasting meats and rich sauces hung in the air, but the stoves were being turned off one by one. The entire culinary team was untying their aprons and packing away their expensive custom knives. The executive chef, a man I had personally recruited and paid a premium salary from a renowned restaurant group in the city, looked at me with a mixture of guilt and sheer defiance. He stood by the stainless steel prep tables, which were loaded with hundreds of plates of expensive ingredients sitting completely abandoned. He loudly announced that the working conditions were suddenly unacceptable, and his entire team was walking out immediately. I watched them march out the back loading dock without a backward glance. Right on cue, the doors swung open behind me, and Victoria sauntered into the kitchen. She was holding a half-empty glass of vintage champagne, and a wicked, arrogant smile was plastered across her pale face. She took her time looking around the empty, silent room, taking in the sight of the abandoned food and the cold stoves. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink and asked me how I planned to serve my elite billionaire guests with zero staff. She leaned casually against a metal counter and let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She told me I should probably roll up my sleeves and start washing dishes in the back sink, just like I was forced to do at her engagement party 5 years ago. Victoria was so incredibly proud of her petty sabotage. I did not panic. I did not scream or run after the departing chefs, begging them to honor their contracts. I simply stood in the center of the kitchen, looking at Victoria with a profound sense of absolute pity. I reached up and gently tapped the small wireless earpiece hidden perfectly beneath my hair. I spoke a single calm word to my private security team, instructing them to open the secondary service gates at the rear of the property. Victoria frowned, her smug smile faltering slightly as she grew confused by my total lack of distress. Within 60 seconds, the heavy double doors at the far end of the kitchen burst open with incredible force. A perfectly synchronized line of 40 new culinary professionals marched into the room. They were dressed in immaculate, pristine white uniforms. At the front of the line was a highly decorated Michelin star executive chef who immediately began barking precise orders. The new team moved seamlessly, taking over the abandoned prep stations and firing up the commercial stoves without missing a single beat. The kitchen roared back to life faster and far more efficiently than it had been operating before. Victoria dropped her champagne glass. It shattered violently against the tiled floor, sending crystal shards everywhere, but neither of us looked down. Her jaw hung open as she watched the new staff plate the appetizers with absolute military precision. She spun around to face me, her voice trembling uncontrollably as she demanded to know what was happening and who these people were. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, backing her up against the cold metal prep station. I leaned in close to her ear, making sure she heard every single word over the loud sizzling of the newly ignited stoves. I asked her if she really thought I was foolish enough not to know about the massive cash bribes she had been handing out to my former staff. I told her I knew the exact dollar amount she had wired to the former executive chef to convince him to walk out right before the main course was served. She stammered frantically, trying to deny her involvement, but I cut her off immediately. I explained that I had actually allowed her to bribe them. I wanted them to walk out because their sudden departure gave me the perfect legal excuse to terminate their contracts with cause and without severance. Victoria looked at me like I was a monster, but I was only just getting started. I lowered my voice to a terrifying whisper, delivering the piece of information that would truly break her spirit and ruin her life. I informed her that my parent holding company had executed a massive corporate buyout early this morning. We had completely acquired the supply chain and the full franchise rights to the massive restaurant group that employed the chefs she had just bribed. I smiled as I watched the horrifying realization dawn on her face. The chefs she paid to ruin my gala were not just fired from my resort tonight. Because of her reckless little stunt, they were just officially terminated on a national level across every single property owned by their parent company. They had ruined their entire careers for a quick payout from a woman. Victoria was left completely speechless. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound came out. She suddenly realized she had just triggered a massive wave of lawsuits from the chefs she bribed once they discovered she had cost them their entire livelihoods. The sheer scale of my counterstrike completely paralyzed her. She had tried to play a petty game of neighborhood sabotage, while I was operating on a level of ruthless corporate warfare she could not even begin to comprehend. I stepped back and carefully smoothed the silk fabric of my expensive gown. I calmly suggested she find a broom and clean up the dangerous, shattered crystal glass she had dropped on my floor. I told her it was the absolute least she could do since she was currently standing in my kitchen, taking up highly valuable working space. I confidently turned my back on her and walked directly toward the main exit, feeling the intense warmth of the industrial stoves. I had a grand ballroom full of highly esteemed elite investors eagerly waiting for me, and I was certainly not going to let the bitter jealousy of my sister-in-law delay my ultimate triumph for even another single second. I stepped out of the sweltering heat of the commercial kitchen and back into the cool corridor that led to the main ballroom. The silver doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my newly installed culinary team operating at absolute peak efficiency. I took a deep breath and smoothed the fabric of my evening gown, ensuring not a single hair was out of place. Victoria was still trapped in that kitchen, paralyzed by the realization that her pathetic bribery scheme had just destroyed the careers of dozens of chefs on a national level. I did not feel an ounce of remorse for the devastation I had just unleashed upon her. She had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small and insignificant, and tonight she finally learned the terrifying magnitude of my actual power. I walked down the hallway with purposeful strides, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floors. I could hear the sound of the live jazz band filtering through the entrance of the ballroom. The investors were waiting for me. This was the ultimate validation of the empire I had built from the ruins my father left behind. I entered the magnificent ballroom and was immediately greeted by the dazzling sight of the most powerful African-American venture capitalists and real estate tycoons in the country. They were mingling under the towering crystal chandeliers, holding glasses filled with vintage champagne. The atmosphere was electric with the promise of lucrative partnerships and groundbreaking developments. I gracefully navigated through the elite crowd, offering warm smiles and firm handshakes to my esteemed guests. I could feel the lingering gaze of my mother Yvonne, who was standing near the center of the room with my brother Andre. They both looked incredibly tense, entirely unaware of the absolute bloodbath that had just occurred in the kitchen. Yvonne was still clutching her champagne glass tightly, her eyes darting around the room as she searched for Victoria. She expected her daughter-in-law to emerge triumphant with news that the gala was ruined. Instead, I was the one walking toward the main stage, radiating absolute confidence and control. Andre looked visibly sweating his velvet tuxedo jacket, suddenly appearing heavy and uncomfortable. He had spent the entire evening pitching his fake technology startup to billionaires, and the overwhelming pressure of his own lies was clearly beginning to crush him. I gracefully ascended the steps to the elevated stage positioned at the front of the ballroom. A sleek, transparent acrylic podium stood in the center, bathed in a warm spotlight. Resting on the podium was a thick, leather-bound portfolio containing the master partnership contract. This agreement would officially solidify the financial backing of the investor network, securing the future expansion of my luxury hospitality brand across the nation. Marcus Vance, the billionaire venture capitalist who served as the keynote speaker for the evening, stood beside the podium with a silver fountain pen in his hand. He offered me a genuine smile of deep respect and admiration. He had seen past the desperate lies of my mother earlier and recognized the undeniable truth of my achievements. I stepped up to the microphone and looked out over the sea of incredibly successful and influential faces. The jazz band smoothly faded into silence, and the quiet murmur of the crowd gradually hushed as everyone turned their attention toward the stage. This was the exact moment I had sacrificed my entire youth to achieve. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the modern sound system. "I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight to celebrate the grand opening of this highly exclusive sanctuary. We have transformed these historic grounds into a monument of our shared excellence and vision." I reached out and took the silver fountain pen from the hand of Marcus Vance. I looked down at the massive contract prepared to sign my name and cement my ultimate victory. The crowd erupted into polite applause, their faces glowing with anticipation and approval. My mother Yvonne frowned deeply, her lips pursed in absolute fury, as she realized I was commanding the full respect of the entire room. She had tried to reduce me to a mere event planner, but here I was standing at the absolute pinnacle of power. I lowered the pen toward the signature line on the thick parchment paper. My heart beat with a steady, triumphant rhythm. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a deafening crash. The solid wood slammed against the walls, echoing like a gunshot through the room. The crowd gasped, turning their heads toward the entrance. A corporate lawyer in a gray suit marched aggressively into the ballroom. He was flanked by 3 court officials carrying thick briefcases. The lawyer ignored the startled guests and strode down the center aisle, pointing an accusatory finger straight at the stage. "Stop this event immediately!" the lawyer shouted, his voice cutting through the atmosphere. "Do not sign that contract. This property and all associated assets are officially frozen by a federal judge under strict suspicion of inheritance fraud." The ballroom descended into chaos. The investors began murmuring loudly, exchanging shocked glances. Marcus Vance stepped back from the podium, a heavy frown creasing his forehead as he looked at me for an explanation. The lawyer reached the edge of the stage and slammed a stack of documents onto the podium. "My client Andre is the rightful heir to this estate," the lawyer declared, ensuring every billionaire heard his accusation. "We presented evidence to a judge proving that the deed was obtained through malicious deceit. Any financial contracts signed tonight are completely null and void." I stood frozen, looking down at the papers. Before I could respond, a cruel sound pierced through the murmurs. It was laughter. I looked toward the center of the ballroom and saw Yvonne laughing out loud. She let out a triumphant cackle that echoed over the heads of the confused guests. Her sequined gown sparkled under the chandeliers as she reveled in my public humiliation. Andre stood beside her, a massive smirk returning to his face. They actually believed they had won. They thought this dramatic ambush would permanently destroy my reputation. They thought they had finally broken me. They were completely and utterly wrong today. I did not lower my head or drop the silver fountain pen. I simply set it down gently next to the stack of legal documents the lawyer had slammed onto the acrylic podium. The ballroom remained trapped in a tense, heavy silence. Marcus Vance looked at the papers and then looked at me. I offered him a calm, reassuring nod, telling him that this minor disruption would be fully resolved by tomorrow morning. I announced to my esteemed guests that the formal contract signing would be briefly postponed, but the extravagant celebration would continue entirely uninterrupted. My private security team immediately stepped forward to escort the arrogant lawyer out of the grand ballroom. Andre and Yvonne tried to protest, but they were swiftly guided toward the exit before they could cause any further embarrassing scenes. The very next morning, the atmosphere was entirely different. I walked into a sterile, brightly illuminated mediation room located in a prestigious high-rise legal building downtown. The air conditioning hummed quietly, creating a cold, clinical environment that starkly contrasted with the vibrant warmth of my luxury resort. I took a deep breath and mentally prepared myself for the final battle that was about to unfold. Sitting across the long, polished mahogany conference table were the three people who had made it their life mission to tear me down. Yvonne, Andre, and Victoria sat shoulder to shoulder, looking incredibly triumphant. They truly believed they had successfully cornered me into complete submission. Andre leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms with an expression of supreme arrogance. His slick corporate lawyer, the same man who had maliciously crashed my gala, sat beside him, arranging neat stacks of intimidating legal files. My own legal counsel sat quietly next to me, waiting for my explicit signal. The lawyer of my brother cleared his throat and officially laid out their outrageous demands. He stated that in order to avoid a lengthy and publicly humiliating court battle over the newly discovered will addendum, I must surrender 100% of the resort property immediately. He claimed their legal standing was absolute and irrefutable. My mother, Yvonne, placed her manicured hands flat on the table, projecting a sickening display of fake maternal concern. She told me that she did not want to see me completely destitute and begging on the streets. She claimed she was willing to be highly generous given the circumstances. She offered me a pathetic monthly allowance of $2,000 so I could rent a tiny, cramped apartment somewhere far away in the city. She said it was exactly what my father Elias would have wanted to ensure I did not starve, while Andre rightfully took over the prestigious family legacy and restored our elite name. Victoria could not resist the golden opportunity to gloat. She leaned across the table, her eyes gleaming with absolute malice and unearned superiority. She mocked me, telling me I should just sign the surrender documents right now and save myself the ultimate embarrassment of a trial. She boasted loudly that Andre had just sold his luxurious $15 million New York penthouse specifically to fund this aggressive legal team. She warned me that they had unlimited financial resources at their disposal, and they were fully prepared to bleed me dry in court for years until I was completely bankrupt and homeless. She smiled wickedly, entirely convinced she had won the war. I did not flinch. I did not show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. I looked directly at Victoria and allowed a slow, chilling smile to form on my face. I opened my sleek black briefcase and pulled out a thick-bound stack of certified financial documents. I slid them gently onto the center of the conference table right in front of my arrogant sister-in-law. I looked at Victoria and asked her if Andre had truly sold his magnificent penthouse to fund this malicious lawsuit. I asked her if she actually believed the ridiculous lies her husband had been feeding her for the past 12 months. I pushed the documents closer to Victoria and calmly explained the actual truth. I told her that the New York penthouse was never sold on the real estate market. It was abruptly and forcibly foreclosed on by the bank, because Andre had recklessly lost $15 million day trading cryptocurrency in a desperate, pathetic attempt to look like a highly successful tech investor. I watched the color drain entirely from the face of Victoria. She turned to look at Andre, who was suddenly sweating profusely, his arrogant posture completely collapsing in real time. He looked like a cornered animal desperately searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. I did not stop there because I wanted to ensure their destruction was absolute. I explained that when a massive debt like that goes into total default, it gets sold off to specialized holding companies for collection. I pointed directly to the final signature on the primary debt acquisition file resting on the table. The company that had purchased the massive $15 million bad debt of my brother was a limited liability corporation. I slowly leaned forward, making sure my voice was crystal clear, and I was the sole registered owner of that exact corporation. I looked Andre dead in the eyes and informed him that I was now his primary legal creditor. He was completely and utterly bankrupt. He did not have a single dime to his name, let alone the funds to pay for the expensive corporate lawyer sitting nervously next to him. Victoria let out a sharp, audible gasp, covering her mouth in absolute, undeniable horror. She slowly turned her head to stare at her husband, realizing that the wealthy, elite lifestyle she married him for was nothing but a complete and total illusion. She was legally tied to a broke, fraudulent failure who had just dragged her down into his own catastrophic financial ruin. The silence in the mediation room was incredibly heavy as the full weight of my revelation finally crushed the last remaining fragments of their fake golden empire, leaving them with absolutely nothing. My mother, Yvonne, stared at the financial papers, completely unable to comprehend the massive scale of the disaster unfolding right before her very eyes. Her precious golden child was entirely at my absolute mercy. The crisp morning sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the downtown legal high-rise offered absolutely no warmth. I stepped off the private elevator and walked down the long corridor toward the designated mediation room. My heels clicked softly against the polished hardwood floors, a stark contrast to the chaotic echoes of the ballroom from the previous night. I felt a profound sense of calm washing over me. I was not walking into a surrender. I was walking into the final execution of my carefully laid trap. My legal counsel, a brilliant and highly respected corporate litigator, walked silently beside me, holding a single slim black briefcase. I had specifically instructed him not to speak until I gave the absolute final signal. Today was not about negotiating legal terms with my treacherous family. It was about watching them expose the absolute depths of their own malicious greed before I tore their entire world completely apart. I opened the heavy glass door and stepped into the sterile, brightly illuminated mediation room. The air conditioning hummed quietly in the background, creating a cold and clinical environment that perfectly matched the lack of humanity in the people sitting across the table. There they were. My mother Yvonne, my brother Andre, and my sister-in-law Victoria were sitting shoulder to shoulder behind a massive polished mahogany conference table. They looked incredibly triumphant, radiating a sickening level of arrogant satisfaction. They truly believed they had successfully cornered me into complete and total submission. Andre leaned far back in his expensive leather chair, crossing his arms tightly over his chest, with an expression of supreme, unearned confidence. The nervous, sweating wreck of a man from the gala had completely vanished. He was back to playing the role of the highly successful tech entrepreneur who was completely in charge of the family legacy. His slick corporate lawyer, the exact same man who had maliciously crashed my beautiful opening event, sat right beside him, arranging neat, towering stacks of intimidating legal files. Victoria sat next to Andre, sipping from a glass of sparkling water. She looked like the cat that had finally caught the canary. Her posture was dripping with that specific brand of entitled superiority she loved to wield against me. My mother, Yvonne, sat perfectly straight in the center, her designer suit immaculate, her pearl necklace resting perfectly against her collarbone. She looked at me with a cold, calculating gaze that contained absolutely zero maternal warmth. The lawyer of my brother cleared his throat loudly, demanding the attention of the room. He officially laid out their outrageous and entirely uncompromising demands. He stated his case with the aggressive confidence of a man who firmly believed he was holding a winning hand. He explained that in order to avoid a lengthy, completely devastating and publicly humiliating court battle over the newly discovered will addendum, I must unconditionally surrender 100% of the resort property immediately. He claimed their legal standing with the updated document of my father was absolute and irrefutable. He demanded that I sign over all the holding companies, the supply chain acquisitions, and the full operational rights of the Elias directly into the name of Andre. He made it crystal clear that they were not there to negotiate any percentage or equity share. They wanted every single piece of the empire I had built with my own blood, sweat, and relentless dedication. I did not flinch. I sat perfectly still with my hands resting gently on the cool mahogany table, maintaining direct and unwavering eye contact with my brother. I watched as the lawyer slid a thick stack of surrender documents across the smooth surface toward me. A heavy, high-quality pen was placed precisely on top of the signature line. The silence in the room stretched out thick and suffocating as they waited for my spirit to finally break. They wanted to see me cry. They wanted to see me beg for a small fraction of the business I had created. When I simply continued to stare at them in total silence, my mother Yvonne decided it was the perfect time to perform her usual theatrical manipulation. She placed her manicured hands flat on the table, projecting a deeply sickening display of fake maternal concern. She looked at the lawyers in the room, ensuring she had an audience for her performance of benevolence. "Sydney." My mother began, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that made my stomach turn. "I do not want to see you completely destitute and begging on the streets of Atlanta. You made a terrible mistake trying to steal the legacy of your brother, but you are still my daughter. I have convinced Andre to be highly generous given the tragic circumstances of your massive failure." She paused for dramatic effect, making sure everyone in the room appreciated her supposed kindness. "We are prepared to offer you a monthly allowance of $2,000, she announced proudly. "This will allow you to rent a small, modest apartment somewhere far away in the city where you can quietly rebuild your life without embarrassing the family name any further. We feel this is exactly what your father Elias would have wanted. He always wanted to ensure you did not starve while Andre rightfully took over the prestigious family legacy and restored our elite standing in the community." The sheer audacity of invoking the name of my father to justify their theft was breathtaking. They were trying to strip me of a multi-million-dollar luxury enterprise and offering me a pathetic $2,000 stipend in return, acting as if they were doing me a massive favor. They wanted to banish me to a cramped apartment so they could host their high society country club friends in the magnificent resort I had constructed from the dirt up. Victoria let out a soft, mocking sigh, leaning forward to ensure I saw the absolute delight dancing in her eyes. "It is a very generous offer, Sydney," she chimed in, her voice laced with venom. "You should be extremely grateful that Andre is willing to support you after you tried to steal his rightful inheritance. You can finally stop pretending to be a successful developer and go back to your little design hobbies in a quiet room somewhere. Just sign the papers and walk away before things get incredibly ugly for you." I slowly looked down at the surrender documents resting in front of me. I let my eyes trace the thick black ink of the signature line where they expected me to sign away my entire life. I felt no fear. I felt no sadness. I only felt an overwhelming sense of anticipation. They had successfully built their own stage, they had gathered their audience, and they had proudly declared their malicious intentions. They had completely trapped themselves in a room with the very person who held the absolute power to destroy their entire existence. I slowly raised my head and locked my eyes directly onto Victoria, feeling a chilling smile finally spread across my face. Victoria leaned across the wide expanse of the mahogany table. Her diamond bracelets clinked loudly against the polished wood, breaking the heavy silence that filled the mediation room. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated venom. She truly thought she was delivering the ultimate death blow to my spirit. "Just sign the papers, sweetie." Victoria mocked, her voice dripping with a sickly manufactured sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Do not make this any harder on yourself than it already is. You are completely out of your depth here. Andre sold his magnificent New York penthouse just to fund this elite legal team. We have millions of dollars sitting in a war chest dedicated specifically to utterly destroying you. We will bleed you dry in federal court for years. We will drown you in endless litigation until you are entirely bankrupt and living on the streets. Just take the generous $2,000 allowance your mother offered and walk away before you end up with absolutely nothing." I sat perfectly still, allowing her cruel words to echo through the cold, clinical air of the room. My mother Yvonne smiled warmly at Victoria, clearly proud of her vicious daughter-in-law for taking the lead. Andre puffed out his chest, looking immensely satisfied with the narrative he had spun. He truly wanted his wife and his mother to believe that he was a brilliant strategic mastermind who had nobly sacrificed his prized luxury real estate to protect the legacy of the family. He wanted them to view him as a powerful, wealthy patriarch making the hard choices. I slowly shifted my gaze from the triumphant face of Victoria to the remarkably smug face of my brother. The level of delusion required to maintain his fragile ego was almost fascinating to witness. I did not flinch at the threats. I did not shed a single tear or beg for mercy. I simply maintained that chilling smile and reached down to the floor beside my chair. I lifted my sleek, custom-designed black leather briefcase and placed it squarely onto the center of the table. The heavy metallic clasp snapped open with a sharp, echoing crack that caused both Victoria and Yvonne to jump slightly in their seats. The slick corporate lawyer sitting next to Andre narrowed his eyes, watching my hands with sudden, intense suspicion. He was a professional, and he could sense that the dynamic in the room was about to shift dramatically. I reached inside the velvet-lined interior of the briefcase and pulled out a remarkably thick bound stack of certified financial documents. The papers were stamped with official banking seals and federal notary marks, indicating their absolute, irrefutable legal weight. I did not rush. I took my time squaring the edges of the stack against the table, making sure every single person in the room was entirely focused on my movements. The suffocating tension was palpable. I gently slid the heavy stack of documents across the smooth, polished mahogany surface. The papers glided effortlessly, stopping right in front of the manicured hands of Victoria. She looked down at the complex financial spreadsheets and legal jargon, her arrogant smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. She clearly did not understand what she was looking at, but the sheer volume of the evidence was undeniably intimidating. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands neatly in my lap. I kept my voice incredibly calm, projecting the quiet, terrifying authority of a woman who had already won the war. "Did he?" I asked softly, letting the question hang in the cold air. "Did he actually sell the penthouse to fund this malicious lawsuit, Victoria?" Victoria scoffed, attempting to recover her haughty demeanor. She rolled her eyes and gestured dismissively at the papers. "Of course he sold it," she snapped confidently. "The real estate market in Manhattan is booming right now, and the sale provided us with more than enough liquid capital to crush you. You are just trying to stall, because you know you have lost. Stop playing pathetic little games, Sydney, and sign the surrender documents." I did not break eye contact with her. I shook my head slowly, extending a finger to point directly at the top page of the bound stack. "I highly suggest you read the specific legal heading on that first document, Victoria," I instructed, my tone carrying a razor-sharp edge that left absolutely no room for debate. "Read it out loud so your husband and your mother can hear exactly how deeply you have been deceived." Victoria hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward Andre. For the very first time since she had walked into the building, a genuine flicker of doubt crossed her face. She looked back down at the papers and slowly began to read the bold black text printed across the top of the page. "Notice of default and final property foreclosure," she read, her voice dropping to a confused, hesitant whisper. She blinked rapidly, scanning the subsequent lines of dense financial terminology. "This says the property was seized by the banking institution due to catastrophic failure to meet mortgage obligations." She looked up, her brow deeply furrowed in absolute bewilderment. "Sydney, what is this garbage?" "Andre sold the property to a private buyer. He showed me the deposit transfer." I let out a soft, humorless laugh that sent a visible shiver down the spine of my mother. Yvonne leaned forward, her pearl necklace swaying as she desperately tried to read the documents upside down. "He lied to you, Victoria," I stated clearly, ensuring my voice resonated with total, absolute finality. "He lied to you, to my mother, and to this highly expensive corporate lawyer sitting next to him. That magnificent $15 million penthouse was never sold on the open real estate market. It was abruptly and forcibly foreclosed on by the bank over 6 months ago because he could not afford the mortgage." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, to call me a liar, but the words completely died in her throat as she looked at her husband. Andre was no longer sitting back in his chair. He was hunched forward, gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles had turned completely white. His breathing had become shallow and erratic. His arrogant swagger vanished, leaving a terrified hollow shell. The silence that followed my revelation was heavier than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. I watched as the slick corporate lawyer sitting next to my brother finally broke his professional composure. He leaned over and grabbed the top document from the stack I had provided. His eyes darted rapidly back and forth across the page, reading the dense legal text detailing the massive foreclosure. I could actually see the exact moment the lawyer realized his client was completely broke. He swallowed hard and slowly pushed his chair a few inches away from my brother, as if the financial ruin of Andre was a contagious disease. Victoria stared at her husband, waiting for him to speak. She waited for him to confidently declare that this was all a massive misunderstanding or a clever trick I had somehow manufactured. She needed him to assure her that their elite lifestyle was safe and secure. But Andre could not even look at her. He kept his eyes glued to the polished mahogany table, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. He was utterly paralyzed by the exposure of his colossal failure. My mother Yvonne finally found her voice. Her tone was sharp and defensive, completely rejecting the reality resting right in front of her. She insisted that there must be some kind of administrative error at the bank. She proudly proclaimed that Andre was a visionary technology investor who managed millions of dollars in venture capital. She told the room that it was absolutely impossible for him to lose a $15 million luxury property because his portfolio was incredibly robust. She was desperately clinging to the fake narrative she had worshipped for years. I turned my attention to my mother, feeling a profound sense of closure. I calmly explained that there was no administrative error, and there was certainly no robust investment portfolio. I told her that Andre had never been a visionary tech entrepreneur. He was simply a man who burned through the money of my father to create the illusion of success. I detailed how he had taken massive, reckless loans against his New York penthouse to day trade volatile cryptocurrency. I kept my voice perfectly level as I revealed that he had completely lost $15 million in a matter of weeks. The digital market crashed, and his entirely leveraged position was instantly liquidated. The bank swooped in and seized the luxury property, leaving him with absolutely zero equity and massive outstanding liabilities. Yvonne shook her head in furious denial, but the color had completely drained from her face. She looked at Andre, demanding that he tell me I was wrong. When he remained entirely silent, a look of pure devastation finally washed over her features. The golden child she had placed on a pedestal was nothing but a reckless fraud. Victoria looked like she was about to be physically sick. Her entire identity was built on the vast wealth and elite status she believed she had secured by marrying into my family. She had tolerated my mother and played the role of the perfect high society wife solely for the financial benefits. Now, she was discovering that the lavish foundation of her life was completely rotten. She demanded to know what happened to the outstanding debt. She asked the lawyer what happens when a property is foreclosed and there are still millions of dollars owed to the banking institution. The corporate lawyer cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He quietly explained that when a high-net-worth individual defaults so spectacularly, the bank writes off the remaining balance as bad debt. He stated that the bank then packages that bad debt and sells it for pennies on the dollar to specialized collection agencies or private holding companies. He explained that whoever buys that debt becomes the new primary legal creditor, possessing the absolute right to seize any remaining assets, garnish future wages, and essentially control the financial existence of the debtor. Victoria absorbed this information and slowly turned her head back to me. Her eyes were wide with a new, creeping terror. She finally understood why I had brought these specific documents to the mediation room today. She looked at the second file in the stack, noticing the official transfer of the debt from the major bank to a private limited liability corporation. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. I instructed Victoria to look very closely at the signature on the final page of that debt acquisition file. I told her to read the name of the chief executive officer who had officially purchased the catastrophic debt of her husband. Victoria reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the document toward her. She stared at the signature line for a long time. Her breathing stopped completely. She dropped the paper as if it had physically burned her fingers. She looked at me in absolute, unadulterated horror. I smiled, letting the cold reality settle over the entire room. I confirmed what she had just read. I told them that the limited liability corporation that purchased the $15 million bad debt was my own private holding company. I used a fraction of the profits from my highly successful hospitality developments to buy the debt of my brother. I looked directly at Andre and delivered the final crushing blow. I stated clearly and firmly that I was now his primary legal creditor. He owed me every single dime. He was completely and utterly bankrupt. The impact of my words hit Victoria like a freight train. She realized in that exact moment that she had married a broke man. The luxurious destination vacations, the designer wardrobes, and the elite country club memberships were entirely gone. She was legally tied to a financial failure who now owed his entire existence to the sister-in-law she had relentlessly tormented and belittled for years. The sheer magnitude of her downfall was absolutely spectacular to witness. She sat frozen in her chair, completely unable to process the destruction of her perfect world. My mother buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. The grand illusion of our elite family legacy had been utterly demolished. They walked into this room expecting to conquer my empire, and instead, they found themselves trapped inside their own ruins today. The devastating reality of his financial ruin hung heavily in the air, but my arrogant brother was simply incapable of accepting his total defeat. Andre refused to surrender his massive ego, even as the concrete evidence of his catastrophic bankruptcy sat right in front of him. He violently pushed his chair back and slammed his fists down onto the polished mahogany table. His face was twisted into a desperate, frantic snarl as he pointed a shaking finger at me. He desperately tried to reclaim his position of authority, demanding that his corporate lawyer do something to stop my psychological attack. When his lawyer remained completely silent, Andre reached out and grabbed the forged document he had presented in my grand lobby the day before. He waved the fake will addendum frantically in the air, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. He yelled that my little trick with the debt acquisition did not change the absolute legality of the will. He claimed that the land beneath my luxury resort still legally belonged to him. He boasted that he could simply seize my multi-million-dollar property, sell it to the highest bidder, and use those massive profits to easily clear his $15 million debt. He honestly believed that this forged piece of paper was his ultimate salvation. He thought he could outsmart me by relying on a document he had maliciously created in the dark. I looked at the crumpled paper shaking in his sweaty hands and let out a soft, genuine laugh. I did not reach for the fake will. Instead, I reached back into my sleek black briefcase and pulled out a thin, high-definition tablet. I placed it gently on the center of the conference table, ensuring the large screen was perfectly visible to everyone in the room. I looked directly at my mother Yvonne, who was still quietly sobbing into her hands. I told her that she should probably pay very close attention to what I was about to show them, because it directly concerned the man she had spent her entire life trying to manipulate. I explained that my father Elias was a self-made billionaire who did not build his incredible fortune by being foolish or blind to the true nature of his own family. He knew exactly who they were behind their expensive designer clothes and their fake country club smiles. I tapped the screen of the tablet and a crisp, high-quality video began to play. The audio filled the sterile mediation room with absolute clarity. The video showed the private hospital room of my father on the exact night that he passed away. He was lying in his hospital bed connected to various medical monitors, but his eyes were sharp and his voice was incredibly clear. Sitting in a chair right next to his bed was his personal private legal counsel, taking meticulous notes. I watched the face of my brother Andre instantly turn a sickly shade of gray as he recognized the timestamp glowing brightly in the bottom corner of the video. On the screen, my father Elias looked directly at his lawyer and began to outline his true final wishes. He stated that he was leaving his magnificent $15 million New York penthouse to Andre. The lawyer asked him why he would leave such a valuable liquid asset to a son who had no financial discipline. My father let out a dry, knowing cough and delivered his honest assessment. He told the lawyer that he was leaving the penthouse to Andre because Andre was an arrogant fool who would inevitably lose the entire property within 2 years, trying to impress people who did not care about him. He said that giving Andre the penthouse was the only way to quickly teach him the brutal reality of his own sheer incompetence. Then my father spoke about me. His voice softened with a profound sense of pride and unwavering respect. He instructed his lawyer to leave the ruined abandoned farmland in the Hudson Valley entirely to Sydney. He explained that he was giving me the absolute worst piece of property in his portfolio because he knew I possessed the unmatched brilliance and the cold, calculated, strategic mind required to turn a pile of useless ashes into an empire of solid gold. He specifically told his lawyer that I was the only true heir to his entrepreneurial legacy. Finally, my father looked directly into the hidden camera and issued his last solemn command. He ordered his legal team to protect me from the malicious, blinding greed of my mother, Yvonne. My mother gasped out loud in the mediation room. Hearing her late husband entirely dismantle her fake elite narrative from the grave was a blow she could not mentally process. The man she claimed to have controlled had actually seen right through her toxic manipulation the entire time. Victoria stared at the screen, her eyes wide with shock as she realized that her husband was never the golden heir he pretended to be. He was just a tragic pawn in a final lesson orchestrated by a brilliant billionaire. But I was not finished. I did not pause the video. I told them to keep watching as the timestamp on the screen fast-forwarded to 3 hours later. The scene in the hospital room had changed. The lawyer was gone, and my father was heavily medicated, lying completely unconscious in his bed. The heavy wooden door of the hospital room slowly creaked open. The security camera perfectly captured my brother Andre creeping into the dark room. He looked around nervously, checking over his shoulder to ensure the nursing staff was nowhere in sight. The video clearly showed Andre pulling a blank sheet of paper and a small black ink pad from his jacket pocket. He walked right up to the bedside of his dying, unconscious father. With zero hesitation and absolute malicious intent, Andre physically grabbed the limp hand of my father. He pressed the thumb of our dad onto the ink pad and then firmly pushed that inked thumb onto the bottom of the blank sheet of paper. He was physically fabricating a biometric seal to create a completely fraudulent legal document. He was caught red-handed committing federal elder abuse and massive financial wire fraud on crystal-clear, high-definition video. The silence in the mediation room returned, but this time it was suffocating and highly dangerous. The slick corporate lawyer sitting next to Andre suddenly realized the catastrophic magnitude of the situation. He had just submitted a blatantly forged document to a federal judge based on the lies of my brother. The trap I had patiently built for 2 entire years was now fully and completely sprung, leaving them absolutely no possible way out of their ultimate destruction today. The final frame of the hidden hospital footage froze perfectly on the high-definition screen. The absolute silence in the sterile mediation room was broken only by the sharp, panicked intake of breath from the slick corporate lawyer sitting right next to my brother. I watched his eyes dart rapidly from the glowing tablet screen to the forged will addendum resting on the polished mahogany table. The confident, arrogant professional who had aggressively marched into my grand ballroom the night before was completely gone. He was instantly replaced by a terrified man staring directly at the sudden, catastrophic destruction of his entire legal career. He understood exactly what that undeniable video meant for him personally. He had taken a document given to him by his client and proudly presented it to a federal judge to secure an emergency injunction against my multi-million-dollar property. He had put his own respected name and his hard-earned professional license on a piece of paper that was just proven to be a malicious, fraudulent fabrication. The lawyer began to physically shake. His hands trembled so violently that he accidentally knocked over his tall glass of sparkling water. The cold liquid spilled rapidly across the smooth mahogany wood, soaking deep into the edges of his meticulously organized legal files, but he did not even care about the mess. He completely ignored the spreading puddle and frantically began grabbing his important documents. He shoved sensitive papers blindly into his expensive leather briefcase, permanently ruining their crisp edges in his desperate haste. His breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid. He knew perfectly well that submitting false fabricated evidence to a federal court carried severe criminal penalties, including immediate permanent disbarment and potential federal prison time. He had blindly trusted the arrogant lies of my brother, and that misguided trust had just marched him straight into a massive felony trap. Andre snapped out of his own paralyzed shock when he saw his highly paid attorney frantically packing up his belongings. He reached out aggressively and grabbed the gray suit sleeve of the lawyer, demanding to know what he was doing. Andre still tried to play the role of the commanding tech boss, ordering his legal counsel to sit back down and figure out a clever loophole. He foolishly told the lawyer that the hospital video was probably inadmissible in court, or that they could easily claim my father was somewhat lucid during the fingerprinting process. The sheer arrogant ignorance of my brother was absolutely staggering. He fundamentally did not understand the extreme gravity of the federal crime he had just committed on crystal-clear high-definition video. The lawyer violently yanked his arm away from the tight grip of my brother. He turned to face Andre with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred flashing in his eyes. He did not care about billing lucrative hours or keeping a wealthy elite client anymore, because he now knew his client was actually a bankrupt fraud. The lawyer raised his voice, causing his professional tone to shatter completely. He yelled at Andre, telling him that he had committed blatant elder abuse and massive federal wire fraud. He screamed that he would absolutely not go to federal prison for a broke, arrogant fool who faked a signature in the dark. The lawyer looked around the room frantically, making sure every single person heard his next words clearly. He desperately needed to establish his own innocence on the official record right then and there. The lawyer stood up abruptly, kicking his heavy leather chair back so hard it crashed loudly into the wall behind him. He looked directly at my own legal counsel, who had been sitting quietly and confidently beside me this entire time. He formally declared that he had absolutely no prior knowledge of the malicious forgery. He stated for the record that he had been intentionally and maliciously deceived by his own client. Then he looked down at Andre and delivered the devastating words my brother feared most. "I am officially withdrawing as your legal counsel effective immediately." The lawyer shouted, his face bright red. "You are entirely on your own in this mess. Do not ever contact my law firm again. I will be reporting this entire incident to the State Bar Association today to protect my own license before you drag me down with you." The lawyer snapped his briefcase shut with a loud, sharp click that echoed in the cold room. He did not wait for Andre to formulate a response. He did not offer a single courteous word of goodbye to my mother Yvonne or Victoria. He literally turned his back on them and sprinted toward the heavy glass door of the mediation room. He pushed the door open with massive, frantic force and practically ran down the long corridor toward the elevators. The sound of his urgent footsteps faded away, leaving my family completely and utterly defenseless. They had confidently walked into this building expecting their expensive legal team to bully me into total submission. Now their champion had abandoned them in sheer terror, running for his own life. I remained perfectly still, letting the magnificent reality of the moment wash over the room. My own lawyer finally shifted in his seat, offering me a subtle knowing nod of profound respect. We had not needed to argue a single legal precedent today. We simply provided the undeniable truth and let their corrupt foundation collapse entirely under its own weight. I looked at Andre, who was staring blankly at the empty chair where his lawyer had been sitting just moments ago. The illusion of his power was entirely gone. He had no luxury penthouse, no hidden money, and now he had absolutely no legal representation to defend him against the massive federal crimes he had committed. He was completely isolated and entirely vulnerable to the severe consequences of his own greedy actions. The first massive domino had fallen perfectly exactly as I had planned, and now the real destruction would finally begin to unfold. The room was absolutely silent. I watched Victoria slowly turn her head to look at her husband, realizing that the wealthy elite lifestyle she married him for was nothing but a complete and total illusion. The remaining pieces of their fake golden empire were about to shatter completely in front of my very own eyes. The echo of the slamming door faded, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. Victoria sat completely paralyzed in her expensive leather chair, staring at the space where the lawyer had just been. Her mind was racing, trying to calculate the sheer magnitude of the disaster that had just fallen upon her. She had spent the last 5 years cultivating the perfect image of a wealthy elite wife. She had endured what she considered the burden of marrying into a black family, specifically because my brother offered her unlimited access to country clubs, luxury vacations, and a $15 million penthouse. Now that entire facade was instantly reduced to dust. She was not the wife of a visionary technology investor. She was legally bound to a completely bankrupt criminal who was facing imminent federal prison time. I watched as the blood rushed back into her pale face, transforming her shock into an absolutely vicious, unhinged rage. Victoria slowly turned her head to look at Andre. My brother was still staring blankly at the polished mahogany table, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. He reached a trembling hand out toward his wife, desperately seeking some kind of comfort or validation. He looked at her with pleading eyes, hoping she would stand by his side and support him through the catastrophic ruin he had brought upon himself. He honestly believed that their marriage meant something beyond the designer clothes and the expensive cars. He was about to learn the most painful lesson of his entire arrogant life. "Do not touch me," Victoria hissed, her voice trembling with a level of pure venom that actually made my mother flinch. She violently slapped the hand of my brother away from her as if his very skin was diseased. "You absolutely pathetic, worthless liar," she screamed, her pitch rising to an ear-piercing level. "You sat there every single day and told me you were building an empire. You made me believe I was married to a billionaire. You told me that this resort was yours and that we were going to turn it into our own private summer estate. And all this time you were just a broke, desperate failure, gambling away everything we had." Andre tried to speak to calm her down, but the words died in his throat. He weakly mumbled that he could fix it, and that he just needed a little bit of time to secure a new investment. His pathetic excuses only fueled her explosive anger. Victoria stood up so abruptly that her heavy chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. She looked down at him with a gaze filled with such intense, deeply rooted disgust that it revealed exactly who she had always been beneath her fake progressive exterior. "You cannot fix anything," she spat, pacing back and forth like a rabid dog. "You do not even have a lawyer anymore. You committed a massive federal crime on video. You are going to prison, and you are going to drag my respectable name down into the dirt with you. I gave up my entire youth for you. I defended you to my friends when they questioned why I would marry into your kind of family. I tolerated your overbearing mother and your difficult sister because I thought you were the exception. I thought you were one of the good ones who actually knew how to maintain wealth and proper status." The racially coded language hung in the sterile air of the mediation room, completely exposing her deeply ingrained prejudice. My mother Yvonne let out a quiet, shocked gasp, finally realizing the true nature of the white daughter-in-law she had worshipped and protected for years. Yvonne had alienated me, her own flesh and blood, just to appease a woman who fundamentally looked down on our entire race. Victoria did not care about the reaction of my mother. She was entirely focused on destroying the last remaining shreds of dignity my brother possessed. "You are just a fraudulent street hustler wearing a velvet tuxedo," Victoria shouted, pointing a manicured finger directly into his face. "You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing. I will not spend another single second of my life tied to a broke criminal who fakes signatures in a hospital room." She grabbed her left hand and aggressively yanked the massive diamond wedding ring off her finger. The diamond had been purchased with the money of my father, but Victoria wore it like a badge of her own superiority. She reared back and threw the heavy ring directly at the face of my brother with all her might. The ring struck Andre sharply on the cheekbone, leaving a visible red mark before bouncing off his chest and clattering loudly across the mahogany table. It spun in a slow circle before finally coming to rest right next to the forged will addendum. The visual symbolism was absolutely poetic, his fake marriage and his fake inheritance lying dead next to each other on the cold, polished wood. Andre covered his face with his hands, completely broken and utterly humiliated by the woman he had chosen over his own sister. Victoria did not even pause to watch him cry. She immediately reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. She turned her back on him completely and started storming toward the heavy glass door of the mediation room. "I need the best divorce attorney in the city," she demanded loudly into the phone before the call had even fully connected. "I need to file for an emergency separation, and I need to completely sever all my financial ties to a man who is about to be indicted for federal wire fraud. Find me someone ruthless who can protect my personal assets immediately." She shoved the heavy door open and marched out into the corridor without looking back. Her aggressive footsteps echoed down the hallway, completely abandoning my brother to his fate. The room settled back into a haunting silence, leaving only the sound of Andre weeping quietly into his hands. I sat perfectly still, allowing the sweet taste of absolute victory to wash over my mind. I had now successfully dismantled the very worst parts of their dark souls, and now there was only one final piece of trash remaining to be thrown out of my beautiful, thriving empire today. The heavy glass door clicked shut, leaving the sterile mediation room in a state of absolute devastation. The echo of the vicious racial slurs hurled by Victoria lingered in the cold air, poisoning the foundation of the elite image my mother worshipped. I sat still, observing the total destruction of their carefully curated reality. Andre was completely shattered. He remained slumped over the polished mahogany table, his face buried in his hands as he quietly sobbed. He had lost his multi-million-dollar penthouse, his lucrative social status, and the wife he had chosen to elevate his public profile. He was entirely broken, with no one to blame but himself. My mother Yvonne slowly turned her gaze away from the empty doorway. The flawless, sophisticated matriarch persona she projected to her high society country club friends had evaporated. She looked at her weeping golden child and finally understood the catastrophic magnitude of his failures. She had alienated her own flesh and blood just to appease a white daughter-in-law who fundamentally looked down on our entire race. Yvonne realized that the wealthy, powerful empire she thought she was protecting did not exist. The only person in this room who possessed any real wealth or influence was the exact same daughter she had spent decades trying to destroy. I watched the gears turning behind her eyes as she rapidly calculated her extremely limited options. She had no expensive corporate lawyer left to bully me. She had no forged legal documents left to threaten me. She had no wealthy daughter-in-law to hide behind. She was completely out of ammunition, so she instinctively reverted to the last weapon she had left in her manipulative arsenal. She decided to weaponize the sacred concept of maternal love and family loyalty. Yvonne slowly pushed her chair back and stood up. Her legs seemed to tremble as she walked around the edge of the large conference table. She approached my chair and collapsed, dropping heavily onto her knees right on the cold, hard floor. I looked down at her in mild fascination. This was a woman who would normally refuse to wear a pair of designer shoes twice because she feared looking poor. Now she was willingly kneeling on a dirty commercial carpet in a desperate, pathetic attempt to save her own skin. She reached out with trembling hands and tightly grabbed my fingers. She looked up at me and forced a stream of thick, heavy crocodile tears to spill over her eyelashes, ruining her perfect, expensive makeup. "Sydney, my beautiful daughter," she wept, her voice shaking with an incredibly practiced theatrical desperation. "You have to understand that everything I did was for your own good. I was just testing you. I needed to know if you were truly strong enough to handle the immense pressure of the hospitality industry. I wanted to push you to your absolute limits so you could achieve your maximum potential." I stared down at her, gripping my hands, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound, clinical disgust. The sheer audacity of her lies was almost impressive. She was actively trying to reframe decades of systematic emotional abuse, financial sabotage, and deliberate cruelty as some kind of noble maternal training program. Yvonne squeezed my hands harder, her voice rising in a frantic, pleading tone. "We are a family, Sydney," she cried out loudly. "Black families have to stick together in this brutal world. We cannot tear each other down like this. Your brother made a few foolish mistakes, but he is still your flesh and blood. He needs our help right now. You have more money than you could ever possibly spend. You can easily afford to clear his debts and give him a position at your resort. Do not do this to your own brother. Do not leave us with nothing." I listened to her desperate begging, analyzing every single word. She did not offer a single genuine apology for attempting to steal my property. She did not express any real remorse for actively participating in a malicious federal fraud. She was simply trying to use the shared cultural trauma and the deep-rooted expectations of our community as a convenient shield to protect her favorite child from facing the severe consequences of his own disastrous actions. She wanted me to blindly sacrifice the empire I had built with my bare hands just to subsidize the continued arrogant laziness of my brother. I slowly and deliberately pulled my hands out of her tight, grasping grip. I did not flinch or look away as I severed the physical connection between us. I leaned forward slightly, looking directly into her weeping, panicked eyes, ensuring that my voice was as cold and sharp as a polished steel blade. "Blood does not make you family, Yvonne," I stated clearly, stripping away her title of mother forever. "Respect does. Mutual care and protection do. You did not test me. You tried to bury me. You actively conspired to steal my entire livelihood and throw me out onto the street with absolutely nothing. You laughed in my face when you thought I was going to lose everything I had ever worked for." I stood up from my leather chair, towering over her kneeling form. "Do not dare to sit there and weaponize our race or our heritage to cover up your own toxic greed," I continued, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "You gleefully welcomed a woman into this family who just used a vile racial slur against your own son simply because you thought her white wealth made you look better at your pathetic country clubs. You sold your own soul for a status that was completely fake the entire time." Yvonne opened her mouth to argue and desperately defend herself, but the empty words completely failed her. She stared up at me quickly, realizing that her fake tears held absolutely no power over me anymore. The heavy, invisible chains of maternal obligation she had used to bind me for my entire life were completely broken. She was just a bitter, desperate woman kneeling on the floor of a mediation room, begging for scraps from the daughter she had ruthlessly discarded. The final illusion of her absolute control was completely shattered, leaving her entirely alone with nothing but the cold, devastating truth of her own massive personal failures today. I looked down at my mother as she knelt on the commercial carpet of the mediation room. The absolute rejection in my voice finally penetrated the thick wall of her lifelong delusion. Yvonne slowly lowered her hands from where they had been desperately reaching for me. Her entire body seemed to deflate, losing the rigid, aristocratic posture she had spent decades perfecting for her wealthy country club friends. She did not attempt to stand back up or reclaim her dignity because she knew she had absolutely none left to salvage. Her expensive designer dress bunched awkwardly around her knees, soaking up the cold reality of her total failure. She stared blankly at the floor, her perfect makeup now completely ruined by the salty tears of her own selfish defeat. She had spent her entire adult life treating me like a disposable asset and elevating my brother to the status of a king. Now she was forced to watch her kingdom burn to ash, while the daughter she discarded held the only bucket of water. I stepped back, creating a definitive physical distance between us. I wanted her to feel the vast empty space she had deliberately cultivated over the past 30 years. I turned my attention away from the pathetic sight of my kneeling mother and looked directly at my brother. Andre was still slumped over the polished mahogany table, refusing to lift his head. I straightened my posture and smoothed the fabric of my tailored suit. I was no longer the frightened young girl who used to sleep in a freezing storage shed to accommodate his spoiled wife. I was a highly successful hospitality developer, and I was currently standing in a room with 3 people who had actively conspired to steal my entire livelihood. I let the heavy silence stretch for a few more seconds, ensuring they felt the crushing weight of my absolute authority. Then I delivered the final devastating blow that would permanently sever their ties to my property. "You proudly stood in the magnificent lobby of my luxury resort 2 days ago and gave me exactly 48 hours to vacate my own land," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any familial affection. You arrogantly told me to pack my belongings and hand over the empire I built so you could use it to hide your massive financial failures. I am not going to be nearly as generous with my time. I am giving you exactly 2 hours. Andre slowly lifted his head from his hands. His eyes were red and swollen, his face twisted in a mixture of confusion and sheer terror. He opened his mouth to ask what I meant, but I did not give him the opportunity to speak. You have exactly 2 hours to travel back to the Hudson Valley, pack every single piece of designer clothing your wife brought onto my property, and get off my land forever, I instructed clearly. If I see your truck parked anywhere near my resort gates after those 2 hours expire, I will not be calling my private security team to escort you away. I will be calling the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I pointed directly to the high-definition tablet still resting on the table, displaying the paused video of his crime. I will personally hand them the undeniable video evidence of you sneaking into a hospital room and physically forcing the thumb of our dying father onto a fraudulent legal document. I will provide them with the comprehensive financial records proving your malicious intent to commit massive federal wire fraud and elder abuse. I will make absolutely sure that you spend the next 2 decades sitting in a federal prison cell instead of a luxury hotel suite. The sheer reality of a lengthy federal prison sentence finally broke the last remaining fragment of sanity in the mind of my brother. Andre let out a loud, agonizing sob that echoed off the cold walls of the mediation room. He slid out of his heavy leather chair and collapsed onto the floor right next to my weeping mother. The so-called golden child of the family was now reduced to a trembling, crying mess on the ground. He hugged his knees to his chest, sobbing uncontrollably as the terrifying consequences of his arrogant greed washed over him. He had lost his $15 million penthouse, his wealthy wife, and his elite social status. Now he was facing the terrifying prospect of losing his actual freedom. He begged me between heavy, gasping sobs, promising that he would never bother me again if I just let him walk away without involving federal law enforcement. He pleaded for mercy, claiming he was completely desperate and did not know what else to do when the bank foreclosed on his home. I watched him cry, feeling a profound sense of absolute closure. I had spent my entire youth watching my parents praise him for his mere existence while punishing me for my greatest achievements. Now the universe had finally corrected that massive imbalance. I did not offer him a single ounce of forgiveness or comfort because he absolutely deserved none. I reached down and slowly closed my sleek black leather briefcase, snapping the heavy metallic clasps shut with a definitive echoing sound. I picked up the high-definition tablet and secured it safely inside my bag, ensuring the crucial video evidence was heavily protected. My legal counsel stood up right beside me, gathering his own pristine legal documents and offering me a quiet, deeply respectful nod. We had successfully executed the absolute most flawless and devastating legal defense without ever stepping foot inside an actual courtroom. I looked down at the pathetic sight of my mother and brother crying together on the sterile commercial carpet. They had entirely destroyed their own lives through sheer malicious jealousy and unchecked entitlement. I slowly turned my back on them and confidently walked toward the heavy glass door of the mediation room. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the brightly illuminated corridor, leaving them completely trapped in the suffocating ruins of their own making. I did not look back as I walked toward the elevator. My steps were light and purposeful, carrying me away from their darkness and steering me directly toward the brilliant empire I built entirely for myself today. I stepped out of the heavy glass doors of the legal building and inhaled the crisp city air. The suffocating tension of the mediation room completely vanished the moment the sunlight hit my face. I walked toward my waiting car, feeling a profound sense of absolute liberation. The heavy, invisible chains my family had used to drag me down for my entire life were permanently shattered. My legal counsel walked beside me, rapidly typing on his phone to finalize the transfer of the holding company assets and officially file the injunction against my brother. We had completely neutralized their malicious threat and secured my empire without ever stepping foot inside a courtroom. The drive back to the Hudson Valley was the most peaceful journey I had ever experienced. I watched the city's skyline fade into the distance, knowing that the fake aristocratic world my mother and brother desperately clung to was about to publicly collapse. By the time the sun rose the following morning, the explosive news of the failed hostile takeover had completely leaked to the financial press. Major business publications and elite digital media outlets simultaneously released breaking stories detailing the spectacular downfall of the arrogant tech investor. The financial journalists meticulously unpacked the massive $15 million cryptocurrency loss, exposing the absolute recklessness of my brother. The articles painted a devastatingly clear picture of a man who had burned through his entire inheritance trying to project a fake billionaire persona. The sheer humiliation of having his catastrophic bankruptcy broadcast to the entire corporate world completely destroyed his carefully curated image. The elite venture capitalists and wealthy angel investors who had attended my gala read the morning papers and immediately severed all professional ties with him. Andre was instantly blacklisted from the entire financial sector. No reputable institution would ever trust him with a single dime again. The fallout rippled rapidly through the exclusive high society circles of Atlanta and New York. The scandalous details regarding the forged hospital documents and the attempted theft of my property spread like wildfire among the wealthy elite. The people my mother had spent decades trying to impress read the horrifying truth about her malicious betrayal. The fake progressive image she had meticulously crafted for her country club friends completely disintegrated. Her prestigious social circle, which heavily relied on discretion and pristine reputations, immediately began to distance themselves from the toxic fallout. The sudden deafening silence from her supposedly loyal friends was the ultimate punishment for a woman who valued public perception above her own flesh and blood. I did not waste a single moment gloating over their highly public destruction. I channeled all my energy back into the absolute perfection of my luxury resort. I arrived at the grand entrance of the Elias and felt an overwhelming wave of pure satisfaction. The toxic presence of my family was completely scrubbed from the premises. The brilliant Michelin star culinary team I had seamlessly integrated was operating the massive commercial kitchens with flawless precision. The private security personnel maintained a quiet but absolute vigilance, ensuring the pristine environment remained an impenetrable sanctuary. I walked through the vaulted marble lobby, running my hand along the custom velvet furnishings. I had successfully transformed a neglected piece of ruined farmland into a breathtaking masterpiece of modern hospitality, and now I was finally free to share it with the world on my own exact terms. The official launch event took place that very weekend, completely free of any malicious family interference. The magnificent ballroom was once again filled with the most influential and successful African American investors in the nation. The atmosphere was incredibly vibrant, radiating an overwhelming sense of cultural pride and elite entrepreneurial triumph. Marcus Vance stood by my side as we officially signed the multi-million-dollar partnership contracts that secured the aggressive national expansion of my luxury brand. The live jazz music soared through the vaulted ceilings, while guests enjoyed an immaculate dining experience, completely undisturbed by the petty jealousy of my relatives. I looked out over the sea of brilliant, highly accomplished faces and knew I had successfully created something monumental. The Elias was not just a luxury hotel. It quickly became the absolute crown jewel of Black elite hospitality in the country. The architecture perfectly blended historical elegance with cutting-edge modern design, creating an exclusive retreat for the most discerning individuals in the world. We offered unparalleled privacy, bespoke wellness treatments, and a level of personalized service that rivaled the greatest international resorts. The wealthy elite recognized the undeniable quality and the profound cultural significance of the space I had built. They flocked to the property, eager to experience the majestic sanctuary I had cultivated from the dirt up. The financial response was absolutely unprecedented in the luxury real estate market. The morning after the official launch, my corporate reservations team activated the digital booking system for the upcoming seasons. Within the first 48 hours, the sheer volume of exclusive membership applications and private suite reservations completely overwhelmed our initial projections. The demand from international celebrities, powerful corporate executives, and elite venture capitalists was utterly staggering. The reputation of the Elias spread rapidly through word of mouth among the highest echelons of society, solidifying its status as the most coveted destination in the entire state. By the end of the very first month of official operation, my management team delivered the final quarterly forecasting reports. I sat at my massive mahogany desk, overlooking the beautifully manicured grounds of the estate, and read the staggering numbers. The Elias was completely and entirely booked for the next 5 consecutive years. We had secured a waiting list, thousands of names long filled with individuals willing to pay exorbitant premium fees just for the chance to step through my golden gates. The monumental financial success of the resort completely validated the ultimate vision of my father. He knew I possessed the relentless drive and the brilliant strategic mind to turn a pile of abandoned ashes into a magnificent empire of gold. I stood up and walked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over my pristine kingdom. I had truly and unequivocally won my ultimate victory today. 1 year passed since the grand opening of my luxury resort. The changing seasons brought unprecedented wealth and profound peace into my daily life. I stood on the main balcony of my private suite, looking out over the meticulously manicured lawns of my property. The morning sun illuminated the vibrant green grass and the sparkling blue water of the massive infinity pool. I took a slow sip of my herbal tea, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. I had built an indestructible empire from the literal ground up. My holding company continued to expand, acquiring new premium properties across the country. I was officially recognized by major financial publications as one of the most powerful hospitality developers in the nation. But the universe has a very specific way of balancing the scales of justice. While my life soared to unimaginable new heights, the people who actively tried to destroy me were dragged down into the absolute lowest depths of reality. I received regular updates about the pathetic downfall of my brother Andre through mutual business acquaintances. The arrogant man who once wore custom velvet tuxedos and pretended to be a visionary technology investor was completely stripped of his massive ego. He had absolutely zero money and a heavily tarnished reputation. No corporate firm would even consider hiring a man publicly exposed for massive financial fraud and cryptocurrency bankruptcy. Andre was eventually forced to take a minimum wage job just to survive. I was driving through the city last month when I actually saw him. The heavy rain was pouring down from the dark gray sky, soaking the busy city streets. I watched from the dry, comfortable back seat of my chauffeured car as a battered delivery truck pulled up to a busy intersection. Andre stepped out of the truck wearing a cheap, damp uniform. He was carrying a stack of heavy cardboard boxes on his shoulder, struggling to maintain his balance on the slippery, wet pavement. The freezing rain soaked completely through his thin jacket. He looked incredibly exhausted and entirely defeated. The confident swagger he always used to intimidate me was permanently gone. He was just a tired, broken man sweating in the freezing rain, working a grueling manual labor job just to afford his next meal. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for him. He was finally learning the harsh reality of honest hard work, a lesson our father Elias had always wanted him to learn. The spectacular ruin of my mother Yvonne was perhaps the most poetic justice of all. For her entire adult life, she cared only about projecting an image of flawless aristocratic wealth. She desperately needed the validation of her elite social circle. When the scandalous details of the forged hospital documents and the attempted theft became public knowledge, her prestigious community reacted with swift and brutal judgment. The affluent African-American society members she worshipped absolutely despised public embarrassment and criminal scandals. Yvonne was immediately blacklisted and permanently exiled from every single high society country club in the entire state. The wealthy women she used to gossip with completely severed all communication. They refused to answer her phone calls and explicitly banned her from attending their lavish charity galas. Stripped of her fraudulent wealth and her precious social status, Yvonne could no longer afford the luxurious lifestyle she believed she fundamentally deserved. She was eventually evicted from her massive suburban home and forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. I heard from a distant cousin that my mother now spends her lonely days sitting inside that tiny apartment, bitterly complaining to the empty walls. She constantly mutters about how her ungrateful children ruined her perfect life entirely, incapable of accepting that her own malicious greed was the sole architect of her complete isolation. She traded her own daughter for the illusion of power, and now she has absolutely nothing left but her own toxic resentment. Then there was Victoria, the cruel woman who had gleefully married into my family solely to extract our wealth. She had aggressively thrown her wedding ring at my brother and demanded an immediate divorce the exact moment she realized he was completely bankrupt. She foolishly believed she could simply pack her designer bags, run away to a different state, and quickly find another wealthy man to fund her lavish lifestyle. Victoria assumed her white privilege would automatically protect her from any severe legal consequences. She was horribly mistaken. During the intense forensic financial investigation into the massive debts of my brother, federal auditors discovered a long trail of severe financial discrepancies deeply tied to her personal accounts. Victoria had been actively hiding massive amounts of offshore money and intentionally filing fraudulent joint tax returns for years. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about your race or your perceived social superiority. They only care about the numbers, and her numbers were wildly illegal. Victoria was aggressively indicted on multiple severe tax evasion charges in her new home state. Her arrogant, entitled demeanor completely shattered when federal agents showed up at her new apartment and officially confiscated her passport. The government systematically froze every single one of her hidden bank accounts and seized her extensive collection of designer jewelry to pay off her massive mounting tax penalties. The woman who once stood in my grand lobby and threatened to have me arrested for simply existing on my own property was now facing the terrifying reality of a very lengthy federal prison sentence. She tried to play the role of the innocent, confused wife, but the federal prosecutors presented undeniable paper trails proving she was an active, willing participant in the financial deception. Her entire world collapsed, leaving her completely destitute and legally trapped. The absolute destruction of their lives was not something I actively orchestrated. I did not hire investigators to ruin Victoria or pay country club presidents to banish my mother. I simply exposed the objective, undeniable truth and allowed the natural consequences of their own malicious actions to finally catch up with them. They had spent their entire lives lying, stealing, and stepping on anyone they considered beneath them to maintain a fake empire. When you build a house entirely out of deceit and stolen money, it only takes one strong gust of wind to knock the entire structure down today. The heavy rain that had been falling all morning finally began to clear as my private chauffeur drove my custom black Maybach smoothly down the busy downtown avenue. I sat comfortably in the spacious back seat, letting the gentle hum of the luxury engine soothe my mind. The plush, leather seating wrapped around me, offering a quiet sanctuary away from the chaotic noise of the city streets outside. I reached out and poured myself a cup of warm chamomile tea from the sleek silver thermos resting on the center console. The fragrant steam rose into the cool air-conditioned cabin, carrying the calming scent of honey and lavender. I took a slow, deliberate sip, feeling the soothing warmth travel down my throat. I set the delicate porcelain teacup back into its holder and picked up the glossy magazine resting on the seat beside me. It was a pristine, untouched copy of Forbes magazine that had just been published and distributed globally this very morning. I ran my hand over the smooth, heavy paper of the front cover. Staring back at me from the glossy page was my own face. I was photographed standing proudly in the grand marble lobby of the Elias, wearing a perfectly tailored emerald green suit. The bold lettering across the bottom of the page read, "The New Queen of Hospitality." The multi-page feature article inside detailed my unprecedented rise to the absolute top of the luxury real estate development market. The financial journalists praised my relentless work ethic, my brilliant strategic acquisitions, and my unparalleled vision for the future of exclusive elite resorts. They called my empire a monumental triumph of modern business architecture. I did not need my mother or my brother to validate my existence anymore, because the entire corporate world was currently doing it for me. I slowly turned the crisp pages, reading the glowing analysis of my massive financial success. The article highlighted how I had taken a completely abandoned piece of ruined farmland and transformed it into a billion-dollar enterprise without a single ounce of outside help. It mentioned the groundbreaking partnerships I had secured with the most powerful venture capitalists in the nation. It noted my flawless execution of supply chain takeovers and debt acquisitions. Every single milestone I had achieved was documented in permanent ink for the entire world to see. I felt a profound sense of closure washing over my spirit. The scared young woman who used to sleep in a freezing storage shed was permanently gone. In her place sat a formidable industry titan who answered to absolutely no one but herself. I closed the magazine and gently set it down next to my teacup. I turned my head to look out the dark tinted window of my car. The city was moving rapidly around me, filled with thousands of people rushing to their jobs and fighting their own daily battles. As my chauffeur navigated through a crowded intersection, we came to a slow stop at a red traffic light. I looked through the thick privacy glass and noticed a battered, rusted delivery truck idling in the lane right next to us. The side of the truck was covered in faded, peeling logos, and the exhaust pipe sputtered thick gray smoke into the damp air. The driver window of the truck was rolled down and a man was resting his tired head against the steering wheel. He looked completely exhausted, his face lined with deep stress and profound regret. He was wearing a cheap stained uniform that was still damp from the morning rain. I recognized him instantly. It was my brother Andre. He was sitting mere feet away from me, completely unaware that the sister he had ruthlessly tried to destroy was currently sitting inside the $1 million luxury vehicle, idling right next to his rusted door. He looked older and entirely defeated, stripped of all the fake arrogance and toxic pride that had defined his entire youth. The heavy burden of his massive financial failures and his crushing legal debts had physically aged him. I watched him stare blankly ahead, waiting for the traffic light to change. I did not feel the urge to roll down my window and gloat. I did not want to shout his name or wave the Forbes magazine in his face to prove my ultimate victory. He was already living his punishment every single day, and my interference would only give him the attention he so desperately craved. The most powerful form of revenge is absolute complete indifference. I simply sat back against the soft leather headrest and observed him as a total stranger. He was no longer my brother. He was just another tired delivery driver struggling to survive the harsh reality of the world he had created for himself. The traffic light finally turned green. Andre slowly pressed the gas pedal, and his battered truck jerked forward, disappearing into the sea of morning traffic. My chauffeur smoothly accelerated, steering my Maybach in the complete opposite direction, heading toward my magnificent corporate headquarters. I picked up my porcelain teacup and took another slow, calming sip of my warm chamomile tea. I looked back down at the glossy magazine cover resting on the seat. I thought about the ruined farmland my father Elias had left me and the incredibly vicious war my family had waged to steal it from me. They had blindly assumed that handing me a pile of worthless dirt would guarantee my absolute failure. They genuinely believed that treating me like a disposable burden would keep me permanently buried beneath their towering egos. They thought burying me in the ruins would break my spirit. They thought leaving me with absolutely nothing would force me to surrender to their toxic control. They completely underestimated the sheer magnitude of my quiet, relentless strength. They did not realize that I was never meant to inherit a pre-built kingdom. I was meant to construct my own from the ground up. I built my empire with pure dedication and fierce independence, while they destroyed their lives with unearned arrogance and pathetic greed. Now, they will spend the rest of their miserable days watching my continued monumental rise to power from the absolute bottom of the gutter. They thought burying me in the ruins would break me. They did not realize I was the architect. The most important lesson I learned from this ordeal is that your worth is never defined by those who are blind to your potential, even if they share your blood. Toxic family members will often try to project their own insecurities onto you, handing you ruins and expecting you to fail. However, true power comes from recognizing that you do not need their validation to succeed. When they try to bury you, use that very dirt to build your foundation. Real family is built on mutual respect, not just shared DNA. You are the sole architect of your own destiny. If this story inspired you to stand up for yourself, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share your own journey of overcoming toxic family dynamics in the comments below.